Hi and welcome. I'm Alexander Russo with The Grade, and we're here to talk about covering education during the month of May. It's the fourth month of Trump 2 for anyone who's keeping track. I'm so delighted to be here with this great group of education journalists. I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves and maybe to say if they have a favorite TV show or movie or song related to education that they might share. Kate Grossman, great to see you. Introduce yourself, please.
Hi, Alexander. Thanks for having me. So my name's Kate Grossman, and I'm the senior education editor and assistant managing editor at Chicago Public Media.
Kaylin
Hi, I am Kaylin Belshaw. I am the national reporter for Chalkbeat.
and Kara.
Yes, hi, I'm Kira Arundel. I'm a senior reporter with K-12 Dive, and I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, it's been a crazy busy month, as have all the previous months. And I'm not sure June will be any better, but we're going to look at May right now. And I wanted to start out by asking everyone to share their thought on what, if you had to boil it down, you'd call the big education story of the month. Kara, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks. I actually felt like May was a chance to breathe from the first 3 months of just a deluge of not just news, but change from the Biden administration to the Trump administration. But May really certainly, when you look back at it, there was a lot of legal activity. We had a SCOTUS decision on the religious charter school and some preliminary injunctions based on the Trump administration's moves. So while I felt it was a chance to take a little breath and be able to do some enterprise stories, there was still a lot of activity at the federal level.
Great. Kate, how about for you and your team?
Well, so at Chicago Public Media and WBZ, we're really focused on local news. So, so of course, we've been following and seeing the doing stories about the fallout from Trump. But I think the biggest story is actually the ending of COVID-19 funds and how that's affecting school budgets. And also related to that, the deep uncertainty about federal funding layered on top of that. So we this month we in Chicago we really focused on the Chicago Public Schools budget, which they are baked into it is a more than $500 million deficit, and this is just the first of annual deficits coming up, and that's in large part due to the loss of COVID-19 relief funding.
The 500 million is, oh,
Primarily due to because, the bus school district was really propped up with a lot of money, and the decision was made, unlike in some other school districts, to spend it on personnel. So to really invest in extra teachers, extra staff, to help tutors, to get, to help kids recover and, advance, in the aftermath of COVID. And, when you staff up, then that's baked into your budget. And that's what Chicago is dealing with now.
right. Kaylin, how about for you?
Yeah, I'd say for my team, some of the same stories, covering some of the preliminary injunctions, looking at whether or not the folks who got, laid off from the Department of Ed are going to get to come back, looking at whether or not some of the anti-DEI stuff is going to stick. But also, my team has been covering some of the ongoing grant funding cuts that have happened. I look specifically at the bipartisan mental health grants that were given out after the mass shooting in Texas, and kind of what that meant for folks who had staffed up with social workers or who were planning to like build out their pipelines with that money because it was cut off in the middle. And for some folks that had like kind of layered on top of the end of their COVID-19 funding that they had also used for mental health support. So it was kind of a double kind of budget cut for them. And we also did some looking at the federal budget proposal that the Trump administration put forward and kind of what that might be signaling going forward. We're obviously still very far away from getting a budget passed, but it
Yeah.
was a good indicator too of what they're thinking around school choice and kind of what they could do at the federal level if they wanted to try and pass something.
Interesting. I'm not in a newsroom doing reporting anymore, but for me, the thing that I was obsessed with all week was uh, what Democrats were going to do on education. Would they engage on private school choice? Would they come up with another focus or focal point? I feel like I'm just waiting for this other shoe to drop. I'm not sure exactly how that story gets written. It's not a breaking news story for sure. It's not a $5 billion federal choice initiative, but that was the thing that was on my mind. One of my favorite things to do is to talk about what journalism uh, people and their teams have written or edited. And I asked all of you to talk or think about what you'd done, you or your team had done during the month of May that you thought was particularly successful and what you liked about it. Um, Kara, let me start with you. I think you had 15 stories just on your own in the month of May. That's a lot of stories.
And
I
vacation.
Oh,
No, we've been, quite busy, but one of my favorite stories this past, month, considering, enterprise stories is a, look back on Head Start. They celebrated the program started at celebrated its 60th anniversary March 18th, and I had the pleasure of interviewing 3 women who attended the program in the 1970s. And then the women went on to careers in education and even careers that connected them to early Head Start programs. And I really liked how that story, came out and to mark that, milestone. And then also, given the news, about Head Start and, sort of the uncertainty of the budget, could fold that in to make it, come back to today.
that was a great one. I also really liked your story about the cost of absenteeism. You wrote up a study and talked to some people about the economic and financial costs of kids being absent. That was great as well.
Yeah,
Uh,
thank you. It was just on California, but it was really interesting how they analyzed. Now it's, the social economic impact of when students are out, when students are suspended, when students are expelled. So it was very interesting.
Kate, how about you?
Um, so our favorite my favorite story that we did with Chalkbeat was about absenteeism. Two reporters, Sarah Karp and Mila Kumpanlova, did a story looking at chronic absenteeism. So those are kids who are in Illinois, it's who've missed 10% of the school year. But what they found looking at the data from last year was that a quarter of Chicago public high schools had missed at least 35 days of school, so more than a month of school, which is pretty astounding. And then layered on top of that, so absenteeism is going up at the same time that graduation rates have also been going up, which seems incongruous just on the face of it. Um, so, so they really looked at why that is. And well, first of all, why kids are not in school. And then how is it that graduation rates can be going up at the same time when there's a lot of evidence that, being in school matters. And also that test scores, the longer you're absent, the lower your test scores.
It was such a great story. I'm so glad you did it. It was also fascinating to me that it looked at the things that schools might have been doing that made it seem like coming to school wasn't a big deal, and your reporters looked into a school that was sort of reconsidering some of the "don't bother coming" vibe that the schools might have been giving. Such a great piece, and also there's also a piece about equity grading that you did, which is seems like it's a bigger and bigger topic. Great stuff. I liked it so much. Kaylin, how about you?
I have a piece that just published yesterday that I had started back in January and picked up and put down many, many times because of the Trump administration news. But this looked at kind of a state, Washington State, that had decided to drop its exit exam for high schoolers back in 2020, so during the pandemic. And they rolled out diploma pathways, which is something that 21 states have now, or some version of that. And so I looked at kind of just what happened in the state after they changed that model. And we found that, a lot of the same kind of inequities and reasons that they had moved away from that single test were still kind of in place. And like kids did have more opportunities and more ways to graduate, but it also got confusing for some kids. And actually, the share of kids who had no graduation pathway, which meant that they were not on track to graduate or at risk of dropping out, was actually the same share of kids who did not graduate on time before. So nothing really changed in like a dramatic fashion. And we also looked at some of just kind of what kids thought about the new career and technical opportunities that were available to them. And I got to interview some students for that. So I got to talk with some folks who, had kind of thought more deeply about what they wanted to study in college because of some of the exposure that they got in middle school and in high school.
This might be stating the obvious, but was May the month where education journalists got to get back to covering slower, more simmering stories rather than breaking news? It sounds like everyone produced a little bit of feature investigative work. Was May different from April and beyond? This may be obvious, but I just wanted to check in with you all about that.
I think so. I mean, I think what Kara said is true, that it was so intense, especially for you guys who are doing national coverage and we're doing the houses impacting our school districts. But I mean, that's still ongoing, of course, but the tempo of it did slow enough that, sounds like Galen like picked up this story on and off many times. And, this big absenteeism package, which Sarah and Mila had been working on a long time, we finally got to really just focus on it, which is huge. And I think this is part of what the Trump administration is up to, right? They're just this flurry of activity so that the world and reporters can't sort of focus anywhere. So I was really grateful that that stopped a little bit.
And we're going to talk in a second about what some of those stories that you and others might want to get to, or may not have yet have been able to get to, but hope to get to once the news slows down, or simply by deciding that you're just not going to write stories about Harvard every day, right? Um, in my mind this morning, I was thinking about if you made a pie chart of news coverage, I don't know how such a thing would be possible. It would be Harvard, Trump, and then there would just be a little slice left for real kids in the real world. So I'm glad things are trending differently, and this is not to say that it's an easy choice what to cover when scary or dramatic things are happening. One of my favorite parts about talking every month with education reporters is asking them to find stories that other people wrote that are not part of your newsrooms or your team or your own work, and to admire them and say a little bit why. I get to do this every week in the Best Education Journalism of the Week newsletter, and when I look back at May, I saw a ton of pieces I liked. Um, some of them I think we're going to be thinking about remembering going forward. Um, Dana Goldstein's New York Times piece, almost an essay, as much of a reported story about has America lost track of student achievement, was amazing to me. Some of the stories you all wrote are part of on my favorites list, and then Corey Turner's story on 9 things to know about, I think it's pronounced Eka. Kara, what are the people in DC calling the $5
Right.
billion choice bill?
Exactly. Eka.
Okay, I live in fear of mispronouncing things. Apparently, I said the name of the store Uniqlo incorrectly for like 10 years, so I want to get Eka right. What were some of your favorite stories that you wish you'd written, or you just were happy that were out there? And I'll let anyone go or anyone pass if they want to pass.
We go. I talk about the favorite stories I saw in the education news space. I really enjoyed the Chalkbeat story on the New York City student with disabilities who face suspensions and the continuation of their services. And I thought the piece went into really covered the legality and what the law says, but with that on the ground reporting from talking with families and school administrators. So I thought that was excellent.
Nice.
Yeah. And then
Shut up.
real quick, Kansas City Star did a story about virtual teachers. And I thought that story was really good because that is such a big challenge in schools, teacher shortages. And I thought it was really balanced with being in the classroom with the students, but talking with families, teachers, students, administrators.
Love it. Anyone else?
I'll do another chalk beat shout out. So again, local news. Um, Becky Vivi did a story about how Chicago Public Schools put up 20 new buildings for sale, which I know just doesn't sound super exciting, but I think it's really important, especially as more school districts have declining enrollment and they have these buildings to deal with. Like there's so many lessons to be learned from Chicago about many things about school closings, but one of them is what the heck do you do with all these properties? And we did a huge package in 2023 looking 10 years after Chicago closed 50 school buildings, of which these 20 that were Becky just wrote about. Basically, like, you can't do anything with these school buildings, they just sit. And so I thought it was really great that Becky covered that this RFP is out for 20 buildings. Most of them, of the 50 that closed, we're talking 12 years later. They just sit in communities and cost the school district money and also just really are not just an eyesore, but like a wound, like in a
Mm.
community in so many ways in terms of a reminder, but also just used to be the lifeblood of a community. And now these buildings just sit there. And so I just think it's a really important story to stay on. So I was really glad she did that.
Certainly an issue that's going to be happening nationally more and more as enrollments decline, or assuming they continue to decline. Kaylin, are you blushing? Is the whole Shockbeat team blushing?
No, but, shout out to Alex and to, Becky for those stories, both of whom, had previously reported on those topics, and so had, like, a really deep bed of sources, and so I think it's kind of in that same vein of getting to go back to the accountability and kind of bread and butter of the education beat. And for me, I think a story that I was really happy to see was Sarah Marabash's story in the New York Times about what kind of happened behind the scenes with the Plaquemines Parish consent decree getting lifted and how the Department of Justice got involved, how the Louisiana Attorney General's office got involved. This is something that I really want to dig into more too, because there are many, many more consent decrees across the South and several school districts that are interested in trying to get out of them. But I also think it's really worth it to talk more to these communities to understand what these consent decrees were doing. And kind of, I think that the messaging around this has been that that people didn't even know that it existed, that it really wasn't doing anything anymore. So I think bringing some clarity to that, I really appreciated that Sarah talked with some folks who went to all Black schools back in the 60s and 70s and had some perspective in her story about kind of what that community had gone through that's right outside of New Orleans, and kind of had a history of building segregation academies post Brown.
Excellent. These are great. I could go on. You all could probably go on with more stories you admired, but that's a good place to start. One of the things we do every month is we ask education reporters and editors to think about stories that might have been undercovered or missed or are being in danger of being miscovered. And I wanted to check in with you about that. Are there stories that aren't getting covered? Are there stories that are being miscovered in any way? Is there anything that is giving you pause or makes you worry or cringe a little bit, even that it would be helpful? This is in the desire for improvement. Would it be helpful to education reporters and those who read education journalism to think about? Um, Kate, let me start with you.
Sure. I don't know how much has been undercovered, but I just don't think it can be covered enough. It's the measles outbreak. And I know it's concentrated right now, but the odds of it spreading are really high. And given the lower vax rates and the sort of the status of public health in our country, sometimes of which, we are now part at Chicago Public Media did a story where they looked at vaccination rates in Chicago public schools, and they found that more than half the schools are below 95%, which is what you need for herd immunity. And it used to be, I think the number was over 90% had herd immunity, and now we're about 45%, which, um, in a 5-year span,
Right.
which just means any kid who shows up who is vulnerable is, and, we get measles in Chicago, is really going to be in trouble. And so we are not the only school district. This has got to be across the country. And so it's just keeping an eye on measles, given what we all went through with COVID. And I just think it's a really important story to keep an eye on.
Interesting. Any other stories? But you were able to get to it. You just think it maybe needs more getting to.
Well, I'm just saying sort of nationally. I mean, since we covered it in Chicago, but of course, it's going to be potentially everywhere.
Great. Anyone else have anything in the category of over or under or miscovered education stories out there? I obviously think that the Harvard is overcovered. One of my favorite headlines from 15 years ago is "Shut up about Harvard." I understand that it's got a lot of salience and probably gets a lot of attention, but my gosh, the time that professional journalists could be doing other things is crazy making for me. But that's just me. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think one thing that's a bit undercovered that I'd like to dig into is um you know there is that movement in the Trump administration for deregulation. I want to find out what regulations are really the pain points for educators, state level, local level, um, and digging into that because I think that is you I know it might be wonky, but I think that can help explain maybe some of the efforts that the Trump administration is doing, and also maybe some of the support that is going to those efforts, but then also what might be missed in the effort to at mass deregulation. So.
Mm. So interesting and connects to the whole abundance theme that some folks are talking about, at least in the media. Um, what's the role of regulation or overregulation in education? Fascinating. Kaylin, do you have something or should we go on?
No, yeah, I think that, when the 5-year anniversary of the pandemic came and went, there were some packages, but I think a lot of journalists were really exhausted, at least on the national beat, and it was hard to kind of do that justice. So I would like to see more reflection on 5 years out, kind of what the disruptions did for kids who are now in the workforce or who are now in college. I'm particularly thinking of myself, who I have a follow-up story I've been wanting to do about, a girl who got really derailed during the pandemic, barely graduated, and is now working in welding. And I would love to just kind of better understand how the pandemic shaped her workforce training and for someone who wasn't college bound, what that looked like. I also think that there could be a little bit more looking at kind of the Trump administration's stated priorities around funding. Something that McMahon said recently was that literacy was going to be one of the top 3 things that they want to fund. And to me, I think that that is one of the only expressed kind of academic things that the Trump administration has really talked about that's really bipartisan, as well as career tech education. And so I think that as reporters, I would really like to see us holding them accountable and trying to understand, like, what does it mean for literacy to be one of their priorities and one of their funding priorities, and what kinds of policies do they want to see states adopting?
That's
Yeah,
so that's so interesting. They're also apparently very sensitive about how the literacy initiative gets covered. I saw the department's press secretary angry about Twitter angry about a Ed Week story about the Trump administration's interest in literacy. So yeah, that's something that definitely could be big and needs getting to. Kara?
yeah, I was just gonna agree, Kaylin. That's exactly a opportunity for review, and especially when you um, balance it with the efforts to close or really thin out the Department of Education. How that will work. So.
This has been great, and thanks so much. We're going to talk about one more thing, which is about the future. I want to mention, in case anyone who's watching this would be great, that the WBZ is looking for an amazing new education editor. You're still looking, right?
Yes, we are still looking.
Okay,
Job
so
is posted.
all the amazing education editors in the world come and help Kate and the BEZ newsroom with the load that they bear.
Thanks
There's
for the plug, Alexander.
yeah, we'll send the link out a bunch of times. There are 3 education editor jobs open right now, which I can't remember when that happened. But Kate, the job in Chicago is the most important job, so we'll just focus on that one for now. Okay, so last but not least, what is going to be either in your world or in the world writ large the big education issue for the summer? Let's just go straight to the summer. It's going to be June, but let's call it the summer. Is it going to be the federal choice bill coming along? Is it going to be what do you think's coming, or what do you think should be coming? I'll let anyone jump in who wants to jump in.
I can go. I think, as I mentioned, the huge budget deficit in Chicago is going to be the big story. We're invariably going to see, well, we're probably going to see layoffs. CPS hasn't passed its, Chicago Public Schools hasn't passed its budget yet. But this is the first year after many years of sort of a, like I said, bolstered by the COVID relief money. So that is going to be the theme for us, among other things. But for the summer, is looking at that and the impact on schools. And as Caitlin said, this 5 years post pandemic, schools have started to make some progress, but we're going to be stripping away probably, maybe some of the things that help bolster that. Um, so that's one. And then also, we also cover higher ed. And so the international students, um, are they coming? Will they not be able to come? How's that going to impact universities? Particularly University of Illinois has about 20% of their students are international. So that's just a huge story. Personal stories about people and the choices they have to make about whether they come or they continue or they don't. And then obviously, what does the Trump administration do? Some people may, no matter what they do, they might just say, "Hey, I'm staying in China or I'm staying in India. This is too risky for me to come and then have my visa pulled." And so, what does it mean on a personal level? And then, what does it mean to the schools in terms of their climate and also their finances? Because those students bring in a lot of money.
Hmm. Speaking of foreign students or student enrollment issues, has there been a exodus or a pronounced downturn in students in Chicago public schools because of the Trump threats on immigration? Has that
I
happened?
mean, we haven't seen. We don't have precise enrollment data, because they only count it really officially at the beginning of the year. But anecdotally, we've certainly heard stories of some families leaving, but we don't have the impression of sort of mass exodus in any way,
Right.
just anecdotally.
Right, there's personal, but also, financial implications, if, people stop attending or, leave the school
Well,
system country.
Chicago Public Schools enrollment, which had been declining for more than a decade, finally got a boost the last 2 years because of migrants coming to Chicago. So.
That's the great irony, isn't it? Or
Mhm.
of the many.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Issues for June or July and the rest of the summer. Anyone
Yeah.
else?
I'll be watching the federal budget, the budget reconciliation, the FY 26 budget debate. And then also a fun article. I've been following a high school, um, a class in high school in DC. They're publishing their first book. It's a collection of essays, and they're actually publishing the book and having a book launch. So that's been fun following that process, and the
Right.
launch is in June. So,
When's the budget reconciliation gonna happen? What is your crystal ball telling you?
they're trying to push it as fast as possible, but I don't see it happen. I mean, they're on recess, so it has to happen in June or July.
Got it. Caitlin, do you have anything for the next month or the next couple months? That
Yes. We're going to be watching for in June or July the SCOTUS ruling on Mahmoud v. Taylor, which would be if they rule like we think they will for the parents, then that would give parents kind of a universal right to opt their kids out of content at school. So I would be really interested to hear if that comes down, kind of what policies that might be shifting for the coming school year. We'll also be watching for budget reconciliation. I tend to focus a lot on how cuts to public programs might affect kind of the downstream effects on schools. And I think it seems pretty likely that we might see some cuts to Medicaid or SNAP or things of that nature that could have downstream effects, especially for qualifying for free school meals. So I'm going to be watching that really carefully too. And then hopefully getting back to some math coverage, which I also put down during the Trump administration news. So I'm hoping to get back to some math curriculum stuff too.
Excellent. I want to thank you all for showing up. This has been the Grades Education Journalism Month in Review for May. I'm Alexander Russo from The Grade, Kate Grossman from WBZ, Kaylin Belsha from Chalkbeat, Kara Rundle from K-12 Dive. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.